I'm Emily McCabe, and this is Fish and Game Changers, brought to you by Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. In this series, I join our staff in the field to learn more about what they do, why they love it, and what drives them to apply their time and talent to the Maine outdoors. Maine is home to the largest population of black bears in the eastern United States. Black bears can be found in all parts of the state and are most active between April and November. When natural foods are scarce, especially in the spring or dry summers, bears will sometimes venture into backyards in search of easily accessible foods such as bird feeders, garbage, grills, and pet food. In today's episode, I'm talking with wildlife biologist Jen Vashon about black bears in Maine and some of the simple ways that you can prevent conflicts or negative encounters with bears in your own backyard.
I'm Jen Vashon. I'm the state black bear biologist. I also worked with Canada Lynx, and I've been working with the department for more than 20 years now. Maine's really fortunate. We've been studying and managing black bears for a very long time. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of Maine's black bear research. And so people that aren't familiar, we've been actually radio collaring black bears since 1975 on 3 different study areas. And the reason that we're radio collaring these black bears is it provides us with real information about how productive the population is and what factors are influencing their survival. And those are really key pieces of information to inform our population estimates. And so that's something that has been like the backbone of our management for decades. And recently, we started looking at new emerging tools and technology. And so we recently completed an integrated population model. And so that's really exciting because this model, really in a nutshell, is just more robust than models we've ever had before. And so that just provides us more confidence with how many bears we have out there. To estimate how many black bears or any wildlife species is out there is not easy, right? We can't just send a survey home and ask how many people live in your household. And so our estimates are always estimates and have some associated bias associated with it. So anytime we can refine those methods, it's really helpful.
When it comes to determining goals around how black bears in Maine should be managed, the public plays a large role.
We want to find out from people on the ground if there are too many bears out there. So we look at hunters and look at how satisfied they are with their hunting opportunity. Because we have a robust population of black bears, we have very liberal hunting seasons. And so we want to look and see, are our hunters satisfied with their opportunities and their experience? But we also want to see how the public feels about black bears. And so living with black bears, and that's something I think we're going to talk a lot about in this podcast, can be challenging for people and sometimes uncomfortable. And so we want to reach out to the public and find out how they're feeling about the population. And so we use that information to help us determine if we're close to where we want the population to be.
If you haven't listened to Season 1, Episode 7 of this podcast, hit pause now and go back and check it out. Jen takes host Katie Yates into the woods to visit a bear den and talks more in depth about Maine's long-standing black bear study and management program. You can also learn more by visiting mefishwildlife.com/blackbear. As I mentioned before, black bears can be found in all parts of the state, with populations being most abundant in the northern half of Maine. Bears emerge from their winter dens in the spring and become very active, which leads into the time of year when many people find themselves encountering some conflicts with them.
You think of the spring as a time of renewal, right? Everything's starting to come back. You're seeing grass, green grass out there on the landscape. Leaves are starting to pop out on trees. Well, it's a time when there's not a lot of natural food out there for black bears. And so they've been living off their fat reserves all winter long while they're hibernating in their winter dens. And so when they emerge from the den in the spring, there's not a lot of food out there, and they're actually very hungry, and they need to kind of replenish after hibernation. And so it's really a time of food scarcity for black bears. So they're going to be out foraging for food. They're going to be turning over rocks and tearing up logs, looking for insects and insect larvae. They're going to be on road edges. That's where you're going to have a lot of your fresh emerging grasses. They'll be on stream edges. They'll be in the treetops trying to eat those fresh emerging buds. They'll be returning to fields or hills and ridges that there might be a nut crop from last season. But they're also going to be more likely to show up in people's backyards when there's not other foods that they can find, and they're attracted to food odors associated with people. The most important thing that people can probably learn, or like I like to talk to people about, is the spring is a time where we're all excited to get outside and do yard work. And so it's a really good time to think about wildlife and what are wildlife doing in the spring. And so just after what we talked about, bears are coming out of the den and they're hungry, and there's not a lot of food out there. So look around your yard and think about what can attract a bear to my backyard or to my neighborhood or to my property, and then figure out ways to secure and remove those. And so two of the most common bear attractants are garbage and bird feeders. And so those are the areas that we tend to focus on, but there's also other foods that attract bears to backyards. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to have people think about, like, are you feeding your pets or livestock outside? Where are you storing your pet food and livestock feed? Where are you storing them? Are they free-ranging, or are they behind a secure fence or in a secure building? Just thinking about all those different things that might attract them. Where do you store your grill? Everybody's enjoying grilling this time of year. So where are you storing your grill? What are you doing after you've grilled? Are you cleaning up any of the food residue, trying to eliminate any food odors? And so those are kind of the things that we kind of focus on this time of year.
I was curious to hear more about some of the most common scenarios that Jen hears about when it comes to conflicts with black bears in our state.
Somebody sees a black bear in their yard, and that makes them very uncomfortable. That's a very common call that we will get. Another one is bears getting into their bird feeder or their garbage, and they want us to come do something about the black bear. Most people, their response is that they're fearful. We often hear there's children in the neighborhood, or I have children, and I'm fearful of what having a black bear in my backyard means for their safety. Can they do the things that they normally do? As a parent, I can understand that. So those are the types of calls that we typically will hear. And so like our response is to try to educate them a little bit about, what is normal, how a bear is normally going to respond, and what they can do to eliminate or kind of control some of that situation. And so one thing that I think is important for people to realize is that we all individually have the power to control whether or not there's going to be a conflict in our backyard. And that hopefully is reassuring, and that there's only a few things that we have to do to eliminate, or maybe not eliminate, but there's just a few things that we can do to minimize the chance of a conflict between a black bear or any other wildlife that might come into your backyard. And so that's what I try to do to kind of reassure people. I could give an example. Like a few years ago, I got a phone call. There were two kind of examples I can kind of give. One was that I've never had before, where the woman called and actually just by me listening solved her own problem. And that was really kind of rewarding, I think, for her and for me, because she talked about, well, initially I had a bear coming into my bird feeder. And so I realized I needed to get rid of my bird seed and my bird feeder. So I did that. But the bear came back, and then I looked around and I realized my garbage was unsecure. And so I brought my garbage inside because she was storing her trash outside. And she said, but the bear still came back. And so as she's talking to me, she's actually starting to think about, and I'm not saying a word, I'm just listening. And as she's talking to me, she's like, oh, you know what? I've been storing my extra loaves of bread outside on my porch in a cooler. I think I'll bring those in. And then she's like, thank you very much, and hung up the phone. And so to me, that was kind of interesting, because she actually knew what she needed to do. She just kind of needed to talk it through. And so that was really nice to hear. She really didn't need any help. She figured it out on her own. But normally that's not the case. Most people are maybe aware of what's there that's attracting a black bear, but it's always been there, and they don't understand why they need to do something different than they've always done. And so another example, I went to this individual's home, and they had small livestock. They had hummingbird feeders, they had bird feeders, they had bees, and all of it in close proximity to their house. They actually had food stored outside on their porch. And so it was just like a mecca to draw a black bear in. And so, and of course, when I talked to them, it was a much worse situation than what was actually occurring. When I got there, there was really no evidence of any damage that occurred. It was just alarming to them that a bear had been coming through. And so we just kind of walked through the property and talked about what was attracting the bear and what they could do to kind of clean up their yard.
Many times, calls come into game wardens and wildlife biologists at the department from members of the public who have an issue with a black bear on their property, and they assume the best solution is for that bear to be trapped and moved someplace else. Unfortunately, that isn't a great solution. It doesn't really solve the issue for the homeowner, and it can have a negative impact on the bear.
So there's a lot of different reasons why that's not a good solution to move a black bear. The first is that if you leave your yard the way it is and you have all these attractants, just like in the last example I gave, just because we move one bear, there's going to be other bears that are going to come through, and it's just going to be a recurring problem that you're going to be having bears come into your yard, and we can't move every bear. And so that's one of them. It's just not feasible. The second part of it is that it's really not as humane as people think. People think, oh, we'll just simply move it and I'll find a home where it needs to be in the wild away from my house. But when you do that, black bears have a tremendous homing ability. And so they're going to likely try to come back to the area that they were in, because that's their home range. That's the area that they live. Your home happens to be in that area that they live. And if we do things to remove attractants, hopefully they won't use that part of their area that encompasses your property. When we move them, they're going to come back. And so they're more likely to encounter roadways and get hit by vehicles. When they're traveling through other areas, they're going to see other bears, and bears are territorial. And so they could get in fights with other black bears and be killed by other black bears. They are likely to seek out foods in other backyards and may get shot by people in those backyards. So it's just really not successful. And we know from lots of research over the years, not just in Maine, but across the country, that bears usually return to the problem area. And so you moved them and then they come back. So it's just really not a good tool most of the time.
Being bear-wise and taking a proactive approach to eliminating known food sources and attractants can be even more effective when the whole neighborhood or community gets on board.
You could do everything right on your property. You could be bringing in your bird feeders, raking up the bird seed, keeping your garbage inside a secure building until the day of trash pickup or until you go to your local dump or facility. You could be storing your grill inside, not feeding pets outdoors, doing everything right. Your yard has no attractants, but your neighbor's does. And so a bear's going to wander through your yard just to get to the food that's available in somebody else's yard. And so it is really a community effort. And so as an agency, we can help you out. We have a lot of really cool outreach tools. So we have signs that we can put up in a neighborhood just alerting people that there are bears around and what are common bear attractants and what you can do. We also have door hangers that you can put on your neighbor's doors, because not everyone's home all the time, and so that's kind of a nice way to just let people know that there's a bear in the area and what you can do. And then just even talking to your neighbors and saying, hey, I'm really concerned. What can you do to help? I know you enjoy feeding birds, but would you consider bringing your bird feeder in at night and raking up any seed that's on the ground? Or would you consider not even having your feeders out for a couple weeks until the bear moves on? And so just kind of working with your neighbors, just telling them about your concerns, understanding, what they are enjoying doing and how they don't want that activity to change, but that maybe for just a few weeks it can lead to the common good for everybody in that neighborhood and help things end well for the black bear as well.
You might be listening and thinking, but does this really affect me? I live in southern Maine, far from what I think of as bear country. But the truth is, bear conflicts can happen anywhere, even in urban areas, and even in the southern part of the state where the bear's population is a little smaller.
Black bears are found nearly statewide, so anybody can have a bear problem. And usually where you're going to have bear problems is where bears are living in close proximity to people. So everybody should be aware. And so probably that's one of the probably most important factors that anybody can think about is just being aware this time of year. You may have bears in your neighborhood. If you're hearing about bears in your neighborhood, kind of put that away in the back of your memory that there are bears around. I need to be a little more aware of my surroundings, more aware of what might be around to attract them, and just kind of increase your awareness. And I guess related to that is just realizing there are some areas that are going to have problems every year, and people that live in those communities know that, and they're aware of it, and hopefully they're going to hear this podcast and learn more about what they can do. But in general, if you live in Maine, there's a possibility that you could have a bear problem no matter where you live in the state.
Lots of our listeners are active outdoors people, whether they hunt or fish, or they forage or walk their dogs, or just enjoy walking in the woods and looking for wildlife. What should people know about the potential for encountering a bear in the wilds, and how should they either be prepared for that or deal with it if it were to happen?
Normally when you encounter a black bear, their response is to run away. And so normally it's just going to be a fleeting image of a bear, right? You might see a bit of black fur as they run off, and you're not even sure if you saw a bear. So that's going to be the most common encounter you're going to have. But you may see a bear from a distance and it's not even aware that you're there at that point. And so what I recommend to people is like, oh, this is a great experience, but I'm not going to make this a bad experience. So I'm going to kind of acknowledge that this is cool and that I'm seeing this black bear, and then I'm going to slowly back away. There could be also a situation where you encounter a black bear and the black bear sees you. And so in that situation, you're going to do the same thing. Never approach it. You're going to back away from the animal. And if it starts to follow you or seems to take an interest in your presence, then you're going to make a lot of noise. You're going to move your arms. You're going to try to intimidate that bear and let them know they have no interest in following you or pursuing you. And so that's probably the thing that I can recommend the most. I think you brought up, a lot of people enjoying recreating, and sometimes we recreate with dogs. And so dogs is another area to be kind of cognizant about. What we know is if we look across the eastern U.S., when negative encounters occur between bears and people, the majority of those occur when people are walking their dogs. And so we're fortunate here in Maine that negative encounters between people and black bears are extremely rare. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but if you're prepared, you can hopefully prevent a negative encounter. And so what we know from states that do have had issues with black bears and people, it often involves people when they're walking their dogs. And so what we recommend to people is that they have their dogs on a leash. We spoke earlier about just being aware of what's going on where you are. So if you're recreating in an area, have people been seeing black bears? This is a time of year where you've seen black bears, just kind of being aware and then altering your behavior based on that kind of knowledge. Or then if you're not aware, just always assume, right, that you might see a black bear and what can I do? And so some of the things that I say to people is to remember black bear encounters or negative encounters with black bears are extremely rare. But you can be prepared just in a few ways. If you're out recreating, walk with a walking stick. So what we know about black bears is if you were to get attacked by a black bear, people are more likely to survive if they fight back. So if you're walking with a walking stick, you have a ready means at hand. Something we know from across the country where black bear attacks are more common, or bear attacks with grizzlies and other species of bears are more common, is that carrying bear spray can be a very effective tool, but you also have to know how to use it. So that's something somebody else can consider here is carrying bear spray. And then we've talked about air horns. And so if you were to encounter a black bear and it made you uncomfortable, an air horn can be a pretty good deterrent. So there's a couple of different things people can do to feel more comfortable, but I always want to remind people that it's extremely rare that you're going to have a negative encounter with a black bear in Maine, but you should always be prepared. And then the best thing is just being aware. The other thing we know from when negative encounters occur, it usually involves a person that's by themselves. And so if you're hiking or recreating, it's often better to do it in a group size, particularly a group larger than 3. You're more intimidating, right, in a group. And so stay together. If you were to encounter a black bear, you just are more intimidating as a group.
Even though negative encounters are extremely rare, I asked Jen if there are any circumstances when a black bear might be more likely to become aggressive.
One way would be a lot about what we talked about, bears that are coming to backyards, and every time a bear comes into a backyard, they're taking a risk. They can smell humans, they can hear and are aware of human presence, and they know that coming into a backyard or community is a risk, that something bad can happen. Every time they come into that community or backyard or property and they get a food reward, then they're more likely to take that risk. And eventually, over time, those bears begin to lose their fear of people. And so in those situations, that's where things can more likely escalate into a negative encounter. Often, it's not because the bear wishes to cause people harm, but people get too close to a bear. And like any wildlife or even any person, when you get too close, your fight or flight response kicks in, and a bear's no different. And so if they feel threatened, they're going to defend themselves. And so we just don't want bears comfortable in your backyard. We have the power to control whether or not there's a bear conflict in our backyard, maybe even in our community. And that's just by modifying a few things and being aware. And so as we talked about, just being aware of what are common bear attractants, and then recognizing what might attract a bear to your backyard and removing it and securing that attractant. And so we didn't really go into a lot of detail, but garbage is an example, right? Where sometimes you store your garbage outside. You may not have an outbuilding. You may have a lot of trash and not have frequent trash pickup. Different factors that influence and make people more likely to store their garbage outside. Deliveries to your trash facility so that you're not having it kind of building up. If you're storing it outside, look at your shed and is your shed secure? What can I do to make it more secure? And then when you can't kind of problem solve on your own, reach out to us, and we're here to help. And so just knowing that by taking a few preventative measures, you can actually make your backyard less attractive to a bear and avoid a conflict. And by making your backyard less attractive to a black bear, you're going to make it less attractive to raccoons and skunks and other critters that people don't want in their backyards. And so it's really simple. Just identify what's there that might be attracting them and then remove and secure it.
Even though the spring and summer months can bring about some conflicts between people and black bears, they are still a really important part of our ecosystem in Maine, and there are many reasons to celebrate the healthy population that we have.
Black bears are amazing. Anybody that's ever had the opportunity to work with them or spend time around black bears, whether you hunt them or enjoy watching wildlife, they're just an iconic species. For me, I get to see a bear closer than most people do because we capture them for research. So we see black bears, and so I think we get an even closer look at the species than other people do. And so I think any wildlife biologist that works with black bears has an affinity to them. It's just hard not to love black bears. So, we talked a lot about these negative, encounters with black bears, but there's so many more positive ones that are out there. Most people, we've done surveys, we know that people just really like knowing that wildlife exists, that they're very supportive of having wildlife populations, including black bear populations. So people do love and enjoy black bears, whether or not they're just someone that spends a lot less time outside versus someone that spends a lot of time outdoors. People love black bears. So I'm happy for that. And we see that in countless surveys, that people are just really supportive of the number of bears we have here in the state. And then I guess maybe another thing that people may not be aware of is that Maine has one of the largest bear populations in the lower 48. And that's because, as anybody that spends any time in the state know, that we're heavily forested. We just have a lot of habitat for black bears, so they can live a life in the wild most of the time where they don't encounter people. And so we just have really abundant natural resources available for, our species to flourish here in the state of Maine, and we're very fortunate for that.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fish and Game Changers and learning more about the simple ways you can enjoy black bears in Maine while avoiding conflicts or negative encounters. For additional tools and information to keep on hand or to share with family and friends, visit mefishwildlife.com/livingwithblackbears. If you would like to learn more about this podcast series or to listen to past episodes, then visit mefishwildlife.com/changers. Be sure to tune in next week as I chat with another member of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife team and explore what it is that makes them a game changer. In the meantime, be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite listening app, and if you have a moment, leave us a review and let us know what you think.